The Civil War had ended, but the real battle for America's future was just beginning. As smoke cleared and the cannons fell silent, the nation stood at a crossroads, one scarred by years of bloodshed and division. How do you rebuild a country torn apart by war, with millions of newly freed people, and a society desperate for change? Welcome to today's video. We're going to take a closer look at one of the most complicated and critical times in American history: Reconstruction. After the Civil War ended in 1865, the country faced the enormous challenge of reuniting the North and South while addressing the status of 4 million newly freed African Americans. Today, we'll explore how the U.S. tried to rebuild itself and why Reconstruction ultimately left deep scars that we still feel today. Let's start by setting the stage. The Civil War was brutal. It left entire cities in ruins, claimed over 600,000 lives, and most importantly, ended slavery. With the Confederacy defeated, the South was in chaos. Farms were destroyed, the economy was shattered, and millions of people, both white Southerners and freed African Americans, had no clear path forward. The question everyone was asking: how do we rebuild? President Abraham Lincoln had a vision for Reconstruction. He wanted to bring the country back together swiftly and with as little punishment as possible for the South. His plan, known as the 10% Plan, allowed Southern states to rejoin the Union once 10% of their voters swore loyalty to the Union. Lincoln's approach was about healing, not revenge. But just days after the war ended, Lincoln was assassinated. His death would change the course of Reconstruction forever. Enter Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's vice president. Johnson was a Southern Democrat who wanted to follow Lincoln's plan of quick reunification, but with one major difference: he wasn't interested in giving newly freed African Americans full rights. Johnson's policies were lenient on the South. He pardoned many Confederate leaders and allowed Southern states to quickly pass black codes, laws designed to limit the freedoms of African Americans and keep them in conditions similar to slavery. Congress, particularly a group known as the Radical Republicans, saw things differently. Led by figures like Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner, they believed that true equality could only be achieved through drastic measures. They pushed for harsher punishments for the South and protections for newly freed African Americans. And this led to one of the greatest political battles in American history: Congress versus the President. In 1867, Congress passed the Reconstruction Acts, essentially taking control of Reconstruction out of Johnson's hands. Southern states were divided into military districts, and federal troops were sent to enforce the new laws. Most importantly, these acts granted African American men the right to vote for the first time. For many freed African Americans, this was a time of immense hope. Organizations like the Freedmen's Bureau were established to help them transition into free society, providing food, legal assistance, and even building schools for newly freed men, women, and children. Imagine this moment. After centuries of slavery, families could finally work for themselves, learn to read, and build a new future. But these gains didn't come without challenges. Resistance was growing. As African Americans began to gain political and social power, many white Southerners resisted. They saw Reconstruction as an attack on their way of life. This resistance turned violent with the rise of groups like the Ku Klux Klan, which used terror to intimidate African Americans and their allies. By the mid-1870s, Northern support for Reconstruction was starting to fade. The country was tired of conflict and many wanted to move on. This came to a head in the election of 1876, a highly contested and controversial race between Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden. The outcome? A political compromise. Federal troops were withdrawn from the South, effectively ending Reconstruction. Southern states quickly passed Jim Crow laws, enforcing racial segregation and undoing much of the progress made during Reconstruction. So what's the legacy of Reconstruction? On one hand, it saw the first real steps toward racial equality in America. For a brief period, African Americans held political office, owned land, and had the right to vote. But on the other hand, its failure to protect these gains left the door open for decades of racial discrimination. Even today, the debates over Reconstruction are part of America's ongoing struggle with race, justice, and equality. The questions Reconstruction raised about how to heal a divided nation and how to ensure justice for all are still with us. Reconstruction wasn't just a historical period, it was a promise, an experiment in building a new America from the ashes of war. And while it didn't fully succeed, it set the stage for future struggles and victories in the long fight for civil rights. So, what do you think? Could Reconstruction have worked if things had been handled differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep this conversation going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into history.